So I'm going to use about 10 to 15 minutes to briefly talk about warm season turf grasses for equine turf. And you're going to see a lot of the same stuff that Doctors Munchaw and Goatley discussed, which is that we have this idea in turf grass about what we call the transition zone. And it's exactly what it sounds like. We're transitioning from the exclusive grasses of the warm season region into a mix of cool season and warm season. And then as you go farther into the north, you're at 100% cool season grasses. And as was mentioned previously, that's constantly changing. We're starting to see Bermuda grass move more and more into the north with a lot of dual type systems. And as we get winter tolerance in some of our cultivars and varieties, and we're starting to see some of the cool season grasses head back south a little bit. But today I'm going to talk mainly about the warm season turf grasses, Bermuda grass, with 3 slides at the very end to at least briefly mention Bahia grass. Why do we talk about Bermuda grass for equine surfaces? Well, it handles wear really well. So even if you start to see trails or worn spots, it's going to recover from that and come back in. Also, it has a very quick growth rate. So we can talk about having it as it recovers, grow and fill very quickly. From sprigging or establishment, I can get some degree of almost 100% Bermuda grass cover, at least in appearance, within perhaps a 6 to 8 week period, for example. There's lots and lots of different cultivars available in the market. You noticed as they talked about cool season grasses, Doctors Goatley and Munchaw were mentioning specific names of things, and we have lots of that in Bermuda grass, and so I'm not going to really cover that today. It's pretty drought tolerant, and I actually didn't add, it's also pretty salt tolerant. Of the warm season grasses, it's second only in paspalum for its ability to handle salinity. So those of you that manage turf in areas where your water quality may not be good, it's certainly a viable option. The big negatives of Bermuda is it's not especially cold tolerant. So as you wear that turf out or add a lot of compaction into the system and you have no means to cover or protect it, when you get really cold weather, you can kill it. And it doesn't like shade. There's lots of discussions about, oh, this one's more shade tolerant than the other. And as I always say, I can tolerate 20-degree Fahrenheit weather. I'll tolerate it, but I don't prefer it. And it's the same way with the Bermuda grasses. Some may tolerate shade a little better than others, but they don't prefer it. Now, for racetrack managers and polo field people, it doesn't matter. But if you run an eventing facility and you're trying to get Bermuda grass into shaded areas of the galloping track, it can matter. So here's the adaptation in the United States. You see again, it's all completely in the warm season, a little bit in the transition, and certainly one can argue that it's moving this way. And they've been plunking around and kind of looking at it in some areas of Illinois and Iowa, for example. So getting back to this idea, this is some work that Dr. Munchaw was actually involved in. You see, this is a seeded Bermuda grass, cultivar Mirage, and you could plant this grass as late as the first week of August, well into the Midwest, and still get 95% or more coverage. They do this thing called a growing degree day model, and it's various ways of measuring the heat units that allow this warm season grass to germinate and grow. So this reflects some of the newer research looking at the use of warm season grasses well into the transition zone. This is a picture of Bermuda grass. The thing that makes Bermuda grass so aggressive and wonderful when managing it for growth is it has both above ground stems, and you take this same thing and put it below ground. Those are called stolons if they're above ground and rhizomes if they're below, and they help that grass produce a very dense surface that handles wear well. On the other hand, if you're growing zoysia grass, it's a weed because it's very aggressive of growing and going in wherever it kind of wants to. So we have 2 big groups of Bermuda grass that I want to mention because as you're looking to buy or purchase, people will talk about these, and it can get a little bit gray on some of the edges as to which you're getting. So in general, we're going to have Bermuda grasses that produce viable seed. So you can buy the seed and plant the seed and the Bermuda grass grows. And on the other hand, we have Bermuda grasses that are hybrid and the seeds will be sterile or so tinily that they may grow, they're not useful, okay? So we have hybrid Bermudas or we have viable seed Bermudas. Now, if they're hybrid, you have to plant them vegetatively, either by row planting or sprigging or laying as sod. If they're in this Latin grouping Cynodactylon, they may produce viable seed and that would be what you would grow. If they're hybrid, they're a combination of Cynodactylon by Cynodon transvalensis. And these, by the very fact that they are what we call an inter-specific hybrid, two different hybrids means that they are sterile and you're going to have to sod them. Now, you notice I said it got a little wiggly. The wiggly part is that you can have some cynodactylons that you cross with other cynodactylons, and those two produce a viable seed. So sometimes in the advertising lexicon, you'll hear people say, it's our first hybrid seeded Bermuda grass. And there is one that meets that, but there's others where it just gets a little bit wickety as to what's right or wrong. And to further complicate it, we actually have a couple Bermuda grasses that are only vegetative, but they are from this group. They're common Bermudas, but the seed is not true to type. And again, you can only lay them as sod. Whew, a lot going on there. So here, for example, are vegetative ones that we are reproducing by planting as sprigs. They have to be harvested as sod or laid as sod or hand sprigged. That's where hand sprigging in that picture. As a quick note, if you don't use a lot of these grasses, see this stuff right in there? That's plastic netting that in some cases is used to help the sod establish and be cut earlier. Certainly from an equine perspective, you want to be asking questions about whether or not the sod you're buying has that netting, because you wouldn't want it on an equine use. Here's the easiest way to remember: interspecific hybrids are sterile, right? So these are the Cynodactylon, Cynodon transvalensis ones. Here's my mules, right? What can't mules do? They can't make baby mules because they too are an interspecific hybrid between a horse and a burro or a jenny, right? So anytime someone starts talking to you about hybrid Bermuda grass, just think of your mules and know that for interspecific hybrids, you're going to have to go and lay sod or sprig that grass. One of the issues when you do that is over time, they can kind of produce these things called off types. Now, is that a genetic mutation, or is that just some underlying grass decided to come in? Or when you bought the sod at the sod farm, maybe they had a little chunk of different cultivar that has decided to express itself. There's a lot of arguments about that. From an equestrian surface, in terms of racetrack, probably not a big issue. If you're laying in a big time stadium jumping course, this could become something that you may want to think about in terms of appearance. So this is one of our old Bermuda grass athletic fields that I took a few years ago here at Auburn University. And certainly this was sort of an off-putting appearance in terms of uniformity. Here's another quick example. You notice, how you see this looks a little, it's got a lot of sort of stolons that have been kind of thrashed around and are sticking up at this higher mowing rate as compared to this one. This is, which one is this? This is Tiff Sport hybrid Bermuda grass. This is Celebration. And remember how I said there's a few Cynodactylons, the common variants that can only be laid as a vegetative. That's an example of this one. This grass recovers from wear very quickly. It is used on some football fields and it looks good and it recovers when mowed. But notice here at this higher mowing height, it's not perhaps as attractive as a true hybrid, which are often associated with a little higher quality. Another example where it says TT, that is a newer grass called Tiff Tough. It's a true hybrid between Think the Mule, okay? And this is Tiff Way, which is one of our older hybrids, Think the Mule again. And look at how much more green it is. What is this 60, 100, 25? That is percent of irrigation applied. So this is 25% of the water lost to evaporation. So we put this whole tier into drought and then applied less water. Notice that this particular Bermuda is looking greener and far happier than the TIF way. And it's just simply a function of one cultivar was selected and released for better drought tolerance than the other. So again, if water is a limitation or an issue, here's the sort of considerations you can do. Now shifting to seeded Bermuda grasses real quickly, hauled versus unhauled. When you see this, when you're purchasing your grass, hauled merely means that the outer layer that covers the Bermuda grass has been left. These are little leaflets that surround and protect the Bermuda grass. When you spin that off and clean it, you get hauled. So I'm sorry, let me correct myself. This is unhauled and this is hauled. See how there's one that's unhauled left in there that didn't get through the processing? Why does this matter? Oftentimes, if you're planting early in the spring and you want to get that grass to germinate a little bit quickly, you may preferentially buy hauled material. It also may be a little bit more expensive. Honestly, we've done a lot of work between hauled versus unhauled for roadside establishment. We're not seeing a huge difference. Seeding rates on the seeded stuff, Dr. Munshaw, who's on this as well, can comment if I get this wrong. But typically people always said 2 pounds of pure live seed per 1,000 square feet. But the research is showing that you could potentially go to 1/2 to 1 pound of seed, pure live seed per 1,000 square feet and get the same job done. So you could save a little money. What do I mean by pure live seed? Pure live seed will always, you calculate it from the attached seed label, and it is the germination times the purity. Now notice in the case of this tall fescue, these are both really high. So your pure live seed and your actual seeding rate are pretty close. But if you're buying seed that maybe has a polymer coating or a clay coating around it, that reduces the seed in the bag and your purity and your germination start to shift. So sometimes, especially with people that I work with that are doing things like roadsides where they're using native plants or wildflowers, those tend to have a really low germination. So when you take the purity by the germination, oftentimes I'll be calculating pure live seed contents of like 50%. So if I'm saying, hey, you need to seed that at 50 pounds based on the pure live seed, then you really need 100 pounds of seed, right? And I'll get that call a lot from people saying, hey, this didn't come up, it didn't work. And I'll say, did you calculate that on a pure live seed basis? And we'll come to find out that their seeding rate is like only 1/4 of what it should have been. So watch that, and it's on your seed labels. Our turf grasses go dormant in the winter. This is our football field in June. Beautifully green, the Bermuda grass is completely happy. You get a first hard frost in a lot of the Mid-South and you go off color and you turn brown, which leads to the common refrain, it's not dead, it's dormant. So what do? We overseed. This is in November on that same football field. Now you're looking at perennial ryegrass. So those of you that manage eventing surfaces or other areas in places like perhaps North Georgia or other region, and your schedule is you're going to have some winter or early spring events, recognize that some of your galloping track, if you're Bermuda grass, is going to look like this unless you consider overseeding. The other big issue with Bermuda grasses often is shade. Bermuda grass really is unhappy once you get more than 2 to 4 hours of shade. And again, somebody who's marketing or talking to you about the various grasses may say to you, oh, no, this Bermuda grass is shade tolerant. And that's simply not true. It may handle, instead of 2 hours of shade, it may handle 4 hours of shade, okay? But it doesn't prefer shade. The Bermuda grasses are always going to want to be in full sun. And so you need to manage accordingly. And then, of course, we come to the issue of wear and compaction of turf. And here we have an eventing fence, and you see how the jumping efforts have started to sort of wear out and compact that surface. And over the next few weeks, we'll have a lot of discussions about how to manage that. For the short part, Bermuda grasses can usually handle that wear and compaction very well. Because remember, those are two different things, right? You've got the actual physical wear of the leaf surface, and then you have the underlying compaction of the soil. And this is some work, for example, where these are all either a hybrid or a vegetative common, where we're looking at some of the newest cultivars for their ability to withstand human football traffic, games from football. Last two slides, and then I'll be done. I want to mention Bahia grass as a warm season turf because we manage a lot of Bahia grass in equine surfaces, and especially like in eventing when you look at things like galloping tracks. It's very coarse textured. It handles traffic very, very well. It's got great drought tolerance. There are no specific turf grass selections of Bahia, and everyone then goes, oh, Beth, Tifton 9. Yes, it's improved, but it's really still intended to be a pasture and animal grazing grass. And I've got you some kind of general seeding rates in here. Notice the Tifton 9, which does have a higher price point, can be seeded at a little lower rate. There's your area of adaptation for Bahia grass. It's truly a southern grass. There's the Pensacola type and the Argentinian types, but we usually talk about the Pensacola types. And there's a couple other cultivars that are, one notably called Sand Mountain, that's being kind of marketed for this area. I'd be very cautious. The big bugaboo about Bahia grass, especially in an area where appearance is important, is that it throws these big peace sign type seed heads that, as you can tell, are tall. There are some materials that will suppress those seed heads that would be more of a specialty discussion. Mowing, of course, is your first thing to do. There's an example of Bahia grass in the secondary rough of a golf course, for example. It really handles moisture. It's fairly salt tolerant. It's a great utility grass for a lot of your more out of the way areas.
This is Karen, and this is her land. She's been here a long time, along with Mojo. The first fence post went up here. Now there's 5,000 of them. After the storm, she started the cleanup here. And when she needs some peace and quiet, she always finds it right here. This is more than just land, it's home. Karen runs with us on a John Deere 3E Series tractor, because who says a day's work has to take all day? Nothing runs like a Deere. Search John Deere 3E Series for more.
Being a teenager and in high school and middle school is not easy for girls these days. And they get to come here, spend time working around the farm, spend time with the animals, and not feel that pressure until we go to horse shows. The first time I saw this land, I was about 12 years old. I came here with an old mentor. I fell in love with it as a little girl, and I said I was gonna own it one day. My mother, when I was 4 years old, put me on a little pony walking around the zoo. That was it for me. Love at first sight. Like any kid, when I was younger, I wanted to compete more in the Olympics and go Grand Prix and do things like that. But I put that all on the side and realized I had a different agenda in life. I've taught about 800 kids in this area. A typical day starts early in the morning with feeding the horses. Then usually we clean stalls. This is a daily chore, sometimes twice a day. I'm always on the tractor, mowing, spreading things around, you name it. This is a John Deere 3025P. I love my tractor. I couldn't live without it. I like to just relax and be left alone. I call it my husband. He's very reliable, and it doesn't argue. It's so easy to use. My 68-year-old mother has never driven anything like this before, and she was scared to death of it. And once she did, she loves it. She drives it all the time for me and helps me out around the farm. Being here in Florida, we deal with a lot of hurricanes, so it can be very stressful when we're in the path of one. That John Deere helps me so much. We go around picking up debris, moving, pushing things with the bucket. I always have an average of 50 students, so whenever there's a disaster that comes around, They're always here and they're ready to work. I call all my girls my kids. They're like part of my family, and they get scholarships for riding, and so we try to keep our sport here a little bit serious but fun. We go to the horse shows. It's great for them. Good, very nice. Teaches them a lot of sportsmanship, how to be more in charge and have more self-confidence. A little stronger on that. There. The parents tell me all the time, you are such a huge influence in our child's life. I love to share my experience with these girls and be able to steer them in a better path. Everybody always asks me, how do you keep doing this? I say, just the sheer passion of it. What am I gonna do? Get a condo on the beach somewhere? I'm happier here. I'm Karen Neese, and this is my land.